The Sinai Medical Foundation Oral History Project is being conducted by the Leonard N. Simons Jewish Community Archives. My name is Howard Nystien, and today's date is May 8th, 2024. I am interviewing Dr. J. Kozlowski. Dr. Kozlowski, do you give permission to the Leonard M. Simons Jewish Community Archives to publish, duplicate, or otherwise use this recording for educational purposes or for use as deemed appropriate by the archives?
I do.
Okay. So, Jay, just tell me, let's start early. When were you born? Where were you born? What were your early memories like in this community?
I was born on May 27th of 1952 in what I called the Dexter-Davison area, which is where I lived until I was 4.5 or thereabouts, and then we moved to Northwest Detroit. I lived on Duane, 4267 Duane, and have some fond early memories of just a really sweet community with some great shops, some loving neighbors, and to me a nice kind of, as I realized later, Jewish feel to the area. We next moved to Stansbury, Northwest Detroit, where I spent most of my formative years, and from there moved when I was 13 to Southfield, and went to school in the Southfield system. I had incredibly loving and smothering parents who were both Holocaust survivors. Didn't give us much autonomy. They were profoundly protective, my mother more so than my father, overly so, but an incredibly loving and sweet family setting. Mm-hmm. I have a brother and a sister. My mother had several miscarriages, so there was quite significant spacing between the three of us.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the neighborhoods. You have 3 different neighborhoods that you went to. So what were they like? How were they different? How are they the same?
My memories of Duane were somewhat limited because I moved when I was 4.5. I remember taking walks in the neighborhood with my dad when he would come home from work. I had a not so shiny red fire engine that I learned to pedal at a fairly young age. And
we all had that one, didn't we?
We did. We absolutely did. And we were lucky insofar as our upstairs neighbors, we had half of a duplex, were my aunt and uncle, and I had a cousin there, and there was a lot of family that came and went, a lot of people with thick accents. One of my fond memories of that point in my life was from early on. We used to frequent Belle Isle, especially on a hot summer day, and have family picnics with loads of food to eat and just some great company and scenery. And I think my bubble was burst a bit when I was 4.5 and my sister was born. Some of the attention shifted from me, but it was all good. And then moving at a young age to Southfield and having to meet a new group of friends and settle into a new environment, it was pretty smooth. I remember it as being a little bit awkward for me when I went off to school because my parents didn't have a great command of the English language. Their grammar was subpar. They were learning. They spoke mostly, they tried to speak English, a broken English as they said, so they would learn the language, but either Polish or Yiddish. They would speak Yiddish if they didn't want us to know what was going on, typically. And when I went to school, I came to realize that not everybody talked quite like my parents. They didn't eat weird food like I did, and some of the stuff I brought to school for lunch was a little bit embarrassing. Mm-hmm. Fried liver and onions with mashed potatoes, soggy mashed potatoes, just was not a mainstream. I went to Werner Elementary School, the best elementary school in the city of Detroit, and was quite a shy kid, but I made some good friendships in the neighborhood and struck some nice relationships. And I had a working dad who was always working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, a mother who was a homebody, took care of the home and her kids, and things worked out well for me.
Were they connected or exposed to what would be called the Jewish community at that time?
I would say yes. We weren't regular shul goers, but the company that they kept at home, the people they went out with, had over 4 cards or maj, dripped with thick Jewish accents. So everything was Jewish about my life. I mean, there were a number of Jewish, non-Jewish kids that I went to school with, but that was sort of the epicenter of my world. We were not shul goers. We never were. My mom really took to it very late in life. She found some comfort. We would go to the synagogue on the high holidays. I was bar mitzvahed, and I didn't do that well. My voice was shaky and not on tune, but the guy who was bar mitzvahed with me had a terrible voice. So I was told that you did much better than he did.
And when did you start thinking about being a doctor? I mean, what were some of your early experiences that may have been inspirational to you, or some of the things that started you in that direction?
I didn't have such early influencing experiences in my life that way. I went to school, I commuted to Oakland University. I was a homebody, I think in part because of my environment and in part because of my decision. I really was doing well, but sort of floundering. I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I came to...
This was while you were in college?
This was while I was in college. I had no thoughts or aspirations toward going into anything medically related. And I was approaching my junior year. I thought, maybe I'll become a psychologist. As it turns out, many children of survivors have chosen the mental health helping professions. Mm-hmm. I went to a career talk in my junior year, and the career talker, the speaker, was Mel Rubenfire. And what he said so excited me in a way that I hadn't been excited with professional aspirations before. Mm-hmm. I talked to him after class, and one thing led to another. He helped get me a part-time job at the hospital with some data interpretation and collection. And that was it. He really is responsible not only for my becoming a physician, but choosing to become a cardiologist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And was that your earliest memory of Sinai, was connected with him and with that job?
Not really. I had worked, I had a cousin who was an active staff member at Sinai, Ron Joyrich, and he got me a part-time job when I was entering my senior year in high school, which was 1969. Back then, radiologists interpreted plain old x-rays, and that was about it. And I had a job filing x-rays. And that was my first exposure. It was just a job. My parents said you needed to do something. So that was my first Sinai exposure in 1969.
But it was really Mel who was inspirational towards pursuing a career as opposed to just what appeared to be a job before.
Exactly.
Okay. And where did you go to medical school?
Went to Wayne State, and I did some of my rotations at Sinai, in part I think because my mentor was there, and in part because it had a great reputation as a clinical hospital in town.
And what area did you specialize in at the time?
I specialized in internal medicine and was moved to do my residency at Sinai in Detroit. So I spent 3 years of residency there.
And what was that like?
I don't have much to compare it with, but just in talking with other people, to use a word that my parents would have used, it was such a Hamish place. We worked hard. We wore that as a badge of honor, I think. We worked long nights, didn't get much sleep, worked at least a half a day the next day. The group of interns and residents that I work with were incredible. A number of them were Jewish, but I would say at least half were from other countries, either Pakistani or Indian, and we had an incredibly close and caring and covering, got your back kind of bond there. Especially in retrospect, it was really an incredible experience. There were 16 of us in each of the years. We also had some other specialties, say ophthalmology, who did a year of rotating internship. So we really got to know much of the newer staff in the hospital, and also by association with the attending physicians as well.
Mm-hmm. So you were 3 years at Sinai at that point,
mm-hmm.
And was it all internal medicine, or were there other areas that you explored at that time? How did you get into cardiology?
The focus of the program was really internal medicine. I had taken some rotations required and some electives through medical school, and depending on the rotation, I really was attracted to different things, whether it be anesthesia or OB-GYN, but then I kept coming back to internal medicine and to cardiology. I should say also that in applying to cardiology fellowships, Sinai was not my first choice. I really felt that I needed a bit of a broader experience and needed to get away from my family for my health and well-being. Not that they weren't an incredible family. And I left, and I think it was the only time I really disappointed Mel Rubin Fire. I went to UC Irvine in California to do my fellowship, and then I came back.
So how long were you at, was it a year?
It was 2 years.
2 years?
And I came back, I took a couple months off and joined a big practice in town with my privileges having been at Sinai Hospital.
And what was it that brought you back to the Detroit area?
As I had discussions with my late wife, Linda, she said, the reason to go back to Detroit is family, but the reason not to go back to Detroit is family. But we decided to go back and started a life of our own, and I started a practice. She was from here.
Where did you meet her?
I actually met her through an attending physician at Sinai. And again, I'm not saying I'm the best thing since sliced bread, far from it, but oftentimes people would try and do a mitzvah and try and set me up with somebody because I was unattached at that age during my residency. I would easily say no. I said, I'll fend for myself just fine. But Stan Levy, who was a popular name and a force at Sinai Hospital, told me there was a woman he wanted me to meet, and that I couldn't say no to him, and I didn't say no. And through Stan Levy, who had known Linda's parents, I met her, and we were married a year after we met.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So take me through the steps when you came back. Where were you at Sinai? How long were you there? How did your career progress?
Sinai, I had some affiliate privileges elsewhere, but Sinai Hospital was my main and really only hospital at which I attended. So in 1983, when I finished my fellowship, I came back and became an attending at Sinai Hospital. I didn't go anywhere else. I had an office practice. I was part of Woodland Clinic, which was a big clinic in Novi. They also had an office on 8 Mile in Detroit. And I worked under the tutelage of Ed Melanowski at that time, also a Sinai attending physician. Just a quick aside, my first day in practice, I was making rounds on the 5th floor on 5 North, and I ran into an attending physician who was Gerald Loomis. He was a hematologist. And I had called all the attending physicians by their last name. Dr. Loomis, how are you? I was making rounds, my first brand spanking new in practice, and I saw Dr. Loomis on the floor, and I said, hi, Dr. Loomis, how are you? And he said, Jerry's fine. And I said, okay. And as I left, I didn't really know what he meant. I said, see you around, Dr. Loomis. And he said, Jerry is fine. So I asked him, who is Jerry? And he said, I'm Jerry. It's fine if you call me Jerry. So anyway, that was that.
So that says something about the atmosphere at Sinai Hospital.
Very much so.
So tell me a little bit about that from your perspective.
It was mostly, and this didn't make it better or worse, it just made it different. It was so much different than any other hospital I had attended. Obviously, this wasn't the 50s when Jews couldn't get on staff at many hospitals. But it was a predominantly Jewish hospital, I would say 95% in terms of staffing. It just, and I could have been accepted in the same way anywhere, but it just was so comfortable and familiar to me. And I think it was just a nice comfort zone. And again, to use the word, it was incredibly Hamish, and it just felt as if it were a home away from home.
So you had experience at other hospitals. How did it contrast from a medical perspective, from a social perspective, from a personal perspective?
I'm a homer, so I'll own that from the outset. Again, it just seemed more comfortable and accepting and casual, but in a professional way. And but yet very much as academic, and I felt that the teachers there were superb. I really didn't know this going in as a resident, but there was significant scholarly activity and research at Sinai. And Sinai, it blew me away. Sinai had something called the Sinai Bulletin, and every month they'd have a number of articles, case reports, reviews, editorials on things medical. And that to me was not typical for a community hospital. Mm-hmm. And I really came to find, and I think this could be supported, that Sinai was just the premier, one of the premiers, and maybe the premier hospital in town clinically. If you were sick, it was a good place to go and be cared for. Got to be very friendly with the staff, although not in too casual a way. It was certainly respectful, and there was a distance there. There was a doctor's lounge where people sat, ate lunch, saved some time for lunch, and kibitzed, and really learned about each other and families and life. And it really was not being on the fly at all moments. Mm-hmm. So really a comforting and comfortable place to be.
I had heard from some of the other people that we interviewed about some of the innovations that were developed while at Sinai. What was your experience with that?
From what I had heard prior to today, Bob Blau and his crew in ophthalmology really did some landmark work with laser and such. I knew that back then as a resident. I also spoke of the Sinai Bulletin. There was a guy there by the name of Pierre Foa who identified glucagon, which is a key issue or element in the diabetic field. He was world-renowned, had written books. He was from Italy and incredibly well-known and respected. I also remember the clamor, good clamor, if it were, that brought Adrian Kantrowitz to town with his team from Maimonides in New York. Here's a guy who did the first heart transplant in the United States, and beaten out only by Christian Bernard, who did the first one in the world, I think in South Africa. He brought his team, who had invented a left ventricular assist device, sort of an auxiliary heart muscle pump that had never been done before. He did some incredibly innovative work. And again, I don't know the particulars, the finances, or how he was wooed, but really a world-renowned cardiac surgeon. So that really struck me. The intensive cares were staffed by full-time intensivists, which was unusual. Oftentimes in hospitals, it was more of a piecemeal thing, but we had surgical intensive care, medical, et cetera, who ran the show and really gave it a state-of-the-art kind of feel and coverage.
Mm-hmm. So how long were you at Sinai? How long did you practice there?
I started in '83, and when Huron Valley Sinai Hospital opened, that took some of Sinai's name. Actually, once Sinai closed, it was Huron Valley Hospital, part of the DMC. That opened, I believe, in '86. I still attended at Sinai until close to the time when they shut, but my main focus was at Huron Valley. And in the board meetings, I was on the board there for many years. People would call our hospital in Commerce Township Huron Valley, but I always interrupted and added the Sinai moniker to that. So, but I did attend at Sinai less intensively as the years of my practice went on, because my office and my focus was at Huron Valley Sinai.
So you retired when?
I retired a year ago this month.
Okay, so recently.
Yes.
So looking back, what would you say would be some of your greatest, what are the things that stand out the most of you as you reflect back on your experience at Sinai?
Some of the people that really made an impact on me during the course of my career, my cousin did, as I spoke of him earlier, Ron Joyrich, and he let me watch different procedures and just be involved a little bit on the clinical end as a high schooler. And I think that sort of solidified my decision to go into medicine. Mel Rubenfire was a huge force. To this day, I would say that Mel Rubenfire is the smartest clinician that I've ever met. Again, I may be a bit of a homer that way, but he was amazing, set a great example for excellence. And I'd like to think that a little bit of that rubbed off on me. I have really fond memories of Ron Trunsky, who I last saw at the Stage Deli not too long before he passed. And it was sad to see, but he had declined somewhat. His memory wasn't what it was, but he still had that spark in his eye, and just...
what kind of physician was he?
He was chief of psychiatry for many, many years. And he always had a story He usually, when he would see you, would say, "Did I ever tell you the one about?" And sometimes he had, but we'd listen to it again. Just an amazing storyteller. He also had a wad of 3x5 cards and pictures in his sport coat pocket at all times, and would show us a picture or a little vignette from one of his patients without
A photograph?
a photograph or a little story that he wanted to share. And I also was really moved and touched by his sweetness and his way of connecting and just making people comfortable in the field, people who were really distressed to various degrees. So really something that I'll never forget. And again, I think I learned from him how to approach, and again, not that there's a one-size-fits-all, but how to approach and treat someone as if they were the only person in your field at that time, and with respect and a focused interest. Charlie McEwen was there, and he was somebody that everybody knew of. He was the director, I think, of medical education. I believe that was his title. He was an internist. He smoked really heavily, including in his little office. It was a little annoying, although it was acceptable back then. And he would engage the medical students. He got to know them from the time they rotated through Sinai, and I think that helped bring a lot of those students from Wayne State mostly to the doors of Sinai. He really gave it a great exposure, and he was an incredibly well-educated and cultured man who came from Boston. He had a thick accent. I don't remember what brought him to Sinai, but you couldn't be a friend of Charlie McEwen unless you went canoeing with him. So he would take us all canoeing on the mighty Huron River, and it was just a great way of bonding. We'd have a picnic and realize that he was a regular guy with outside interests. So he just made it comfortable. If you were, he was like a den mother as well. Just could listen and help give input to any problems you might be having, and help navigate any personality issues between the attending physicians and students and residents from Sinai.
Sounds like a very Hamish experience.
He was awesome, an awesome guy. A couple of other people who made a big impact. The list is long, but I'll
okay.
keep it relatively short. Stan Levy, who I said was very instrumental and was key to my having met my wife. And he was a bit eccentric. He had met Albert Einstein. He was a groupie of Einstein's and had a number of books signed by him and his entire library. He was an incredibly worldly and cultured guy, and he really had some odd ideas, some outliers in terms of medical care, but it was always based in something he had read, might have been some obscure journal. Stan Levy worked incredibly long hours. The phone would ring, this is in the era before cell phones, and I would say it would be 10, 11 o'clock at night, and unless there were a family emergency, I wouldn't expect the phone to be ringing. I had a beeper to answer my hospital calls. I'd say to my wife, "That's got to be Stan Levy. Please tell him I'm sleeping." Or if he called earlier in the day, I'd say, I'm out. I had to get gas or something. But Stan was such an incredible patient advocate and would freely call any hour of the day, even if it were a call that awakened you, and expect your full attention and feedback. He was great. Sometimes got on my nerves a little bit, but it was from a loving perspective that he did what he did. And also, I would say in the Hall of Fame of Patient Advocates, Leopoldo Eisenberg. Leo, who I see from time to time, was somebody who did not let you do anything to his patients without his involvement, his consent. If you were to order some blood work or a test, or let alone change a prescription, it would be a one-time only. He would just ream you out and let you know that you're not the attending physician, you're not the responsible and ultimate care for that person. And he just taught me the importance of patient advocacy. And I think that's a good place to be. So.
And what positions did you hold while you were at Sinai Hospital?
I really didn't have much in the way of, I had some committee involvement in internal medicine and also in the cardiology committee, but in terms of chair positions or board positions, medical staff, Really not. As I said, in 86, which is when Huron Valley Sinai opened, I came to be on the board early on and was on the board for, I think, some 30 years. I was the chief of cardiology for a long time. Nobody else wanted it. And I was active there administratively, whether I wanted to or not.
And when you began learning about Sinai's going to be closed, what flashed through your mind at the time? How did you feel about that?
I really wasn't privy to all that was going on at the time. It was incredibly sad to me to hear that the hospital was closed. And I think most people might say it just was an edifice, it was a structure. And that's one of the things that entered into the decision to move or shut Sinai and move it to Grace and rename it Sinai Grace. But it was much more than an edifice. And people talked about the fact that there might be a real migration of the core docs, the Jewish docs. I think they hung on to Sinai because of what a special place it was. But once the word got out that it was closing, I think many of the patients or the patient population that had grown up in that area moved out to the suburbs. And I think it was a natural time for the docs to move, whether it be to Beaumont or Providence or eventually Henry Ford, Novi, Providence, so to speak. But I think the gang broke up pretty much. I mean, it was a case-by-case kind of thing. But it just changed. And I would say it really had nothing to do, I may be just speaking naively, but with the makeup of the neighborhood per se. It's just for some reason there was a physician exodus, and the exodus didn't lead them down the block to Sinai Grace.
It sounded like it was not only a change in the neighborhood, but just in the way that medicine and hospitals were changing too.
Very much so. Absolutely. Not that this is so pertinent, but I just reflect back on what used to happen, and I don't know if there was a little bit more leeway at Sinai in this way. I remember mostly fondly, memories of people dropping off their loved one off in a grandma or a grandpa in the ED, where they might spend 3 or 4 days, and the family would go to Florida, emergency department, and let the family, and the family would say, "We're going to Florida, we'll be back in a week or 2, see what you can do." So, I mean, it was a different era of medicine, really. Mm-hmm. And many of the offices, I think, had moved out to the suburbs as well. So, again, looking for a hospital to attend at in the neighborhood of their offices was commonplace.
Okay. So, as you think back, what would you say was the thing you liked most? What would you say were the things that you didn't care for so much?
I read through the questionnaire before having this, and I really was hard pressed to find anything that I didn't like about Sinai. Obviously, it wasn't the whole picture, but having the Jewish environment in which I grew up professionally was really cool. Mm-hmm. It just felt comfortable. I felt well supervised. I was allowed to grow at my own pace, as were the other residents. And the attending staff was incredibly well schooled and versed, and instilled confidence in us with showing us their skills. Something as simple as and as silly as going to the cafeteria and seeing on the marquee that the soup of the day was matzo ball soup, or that with Passover having matzah available instead of bread. It was just a great place, and academically it was challenging, and I think that in turn helped the attendings challenge us intellectually. And I really feel, in having done my fellowship out of town with non-Sinai residents, that our training really was every bit as good, if not better, than what I saw from the other residents. Mm-hmm. It really prepared me well for fellowship and also for practice. There were a few other little things that I have fond memories of from Sinai. Sinai had window air conditioners for the longest time, and the only comfortable place to escape the heat in the summer was the Samuel Frank Library, which was just an incredibly beautiful and well-kept library, shiny floors that they would polish more than once a day, beautiful woodwork, shelves with all the latest journals, and the best air conditioning. They had librarians there that were a throwback to something, and should you even whisper in that library, you were shushed in 1 second. So it was a great place to study, to hang out, and even put your head down and take a nap on occasion. I also have some really moving and loving memories of the Schiffman Clinic. My recollection was, even before, but with the relative mass immigration of some Russian Jews, they didn't speak English, they weren't of means, they needed medical care, and they got that for free at the Schiffman Clinic. I had a little bit of a badge of honor because although I couldn't speak Yiddish, I knew enough words to at least communicate, and I was in part the go-to guy there, which made me feel great. And it really was gratifying to feel that you were making a difference in helping somebody. There was an incredible LPN school, licensed practitioner nurse school. The nurses, I believe, went to school for 1 year, and they were incredible. They were the floor nurses, and to know what their skills were like for such a short or abbreviated course of nursing was really amazing. They really rose to the occasion with their education. I was somewhat involved, not in such a meaningful way, but with the Adrian Kantrowitz project of the left ventricular assist device. I helped to collect some data, and I was proud to have been mentioned in a footnote as having contributed to those kinds of things. I also remember there was a community of Roma, or at the time called Gypsies, in the area. And when a loved one from the Gypsy or Roma community would come in, I don't know if they had 1 or 2 really ultra-long bus-like motor vans, and the families would camp out on the surface parking lot next to the structure at Huron Valley Sinai. And they were accepted fully and allowed to block up a number of spaces. Yeah. So. One very quick silly story that I just wanted to get on video, totally silly. There was a major nuclear accident in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1979. To date, as I read yesterday, the biggest nuclear accident in the United States. That was in 1979. I was a resident at Sinai from 78 to 81, so I was there at the time. And Alfie Sherman and I think Milton Goldrath, 2 senior OB-GYNs, were doing a case, an operation on someone who had uterine cancer, and they were inserting a radium implant. By the way, I didn't think I said, the nuclear accident was at it was called 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. They, in doing that, somehow they're going to place the implant, and it got lost within the walls of the hospital. I don't know if it was ever found, but there was really a big to-do, and everyone was a bit freaked out. And it was dubbed, because Sinai was on McNichols, which was also 6 Mile Island, after the 3 Mile Island. That's all I got on that. So. Again, I just had a great experience at Sinai, left there for my fellowship a little nervous. Things worked out beautifully, and I came back full cycle to attend at the hospital. That was my medical love of my life.
Great. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to add before we close?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that is, I'm sure I'll have some afterthoughts, but I think that's the gist of it.
Well, it's been a real pleasure meeting you and having a chance to talk with you and to learn about some of the things that were occurring at the hospital during those very special years.
Thanks so much, Howard. It's my pleasure.